happy to be here. We're remote right now, but we're doing WebEx appointments, email consultations, etc. So my email will be at the end of this. You can always email me with questions or just set something up if you're not sure how to use Handshake yet. Okay, so how can we help? Like I mentioned, we compile these hiring statistics, and I often share them with students who are considering different majors. I think it helps to see where students go after graduation, depending on the major. And it helps students who are starting their job search as well, just so they can get a starting point of companies that have a relationship with RPI. And these are some employer examples. And just a quick note, I don't have a screenshot of it here, but if you even just Google CCPD RPI hiring statistics, it'll take you to some box files that have all of these lists. I pulled a few, from the list right now. So we have Fabic, BioMar and Pharmaceutical, General Mills, and FM Global. So I wanted to showcase just the variety of different positions, and you'll see that with the speakers tonight as well. But the different sorts of careers that chemies, can pursue, essentially. Fabic is more focused on, petrochemical manufacturing. Then you have a pharmaceutical company. There's some information about it. A lot of our chemies do go into pharmaceuticals, as do the BMEs as well. General Mills, I thought was really cool to show. It was like food science, chemi. That's definitely something you can pursue with that you might not think of automatically. And then FM Global is a company that recruits pretty extensively at RPI, and they do insurance and risk assessment, but with an engineering foundation. So we've had chemies go there as well. There are a bunch of companies I highlighted for. You have, Exxon, different labs that students go to, Regeneron, as I'll show you in a sec. So a lot of different companies. And I'll show you now. So here are these are just jobs that I saw on Handshake. Sorry for the typo up there. So that I pulled today. So like I said, Handshake is our career management system, where jobs are posted, different companies can post jobs. And I wanted to just, again, showcase the different types of positions. So Regeneron is, a big name around here. They take a lot of chemies, BMEs, and, other majors as well. This is more over here, sort of a fellowship for research at the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education. Then you have metals and films process engineer, which can also overlap with materials a little. Southwest Research Institute, so that internship focuses on fire technology. And then you have something at Sandia National Labs, microfabrication engineer. So again, you can see a variety of different opportunities for chemies available. And these are the salary statistics. So, so from class of 2018, those reporting, the average was 68,631, and then the range was 50 to 100,000, and that's quite a large range. You saw the variety. Some students go to companies like Exxon, where the salary might be on the higher end, and then just depending on what you do, it can really vary. That's why it's a big range. And then overall, BLS.gov is a really helpful website put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this was the median pay posted there. So this is not just our statistics are students who are going to entry-level positions mostly, because we compile grad students separately, whereas on BLS.gov, that's going to be an overall. So chemies who've been in the field, for a while, and entry level as well. So you'll see 108,770. So if sometimes looking at salary statistics can also help students when they're deciding on a major. So like I mentioned, we do a bunch of different things. like helping explore different majors, but we also help with resume creation and critiquing resumes, mock interviewing, negotiating salary, applying to grad school, networking, like building your LinkedIn profile, self-assessment. We have something called Focus 2 that Kristen refers students need to take, and it's a really cool just skills and interest assessment that you can take online, and then we can always discuss it. If you're interested in that, you can always email me about it. Like I said, here's my email. My name is Lindsay Demner. Like I said, I'll open up for questions now as well. But like I said, if you think of questions later, if you have a more extensive or specific question, definitely feel free to email me. So that's my short presentation right now. But yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions if anyone, has any.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Yeah, if anyone has questions, of course, don't be shy to throw them in the chat room. We can read them right out from there for you. Or if you'd like to unmute your mic and ask Lindsay a question, we do have a couple minutes. So don't be shy. And Lindsay, actually, I would love it if there are no questions or while we wait for questions, could you talk about like Focus 2 a little bit more and how it can help students kind of connect to a major? Because I know this is actually a conversation I've had with a lot of you undeclared lately. So I'd love to have obviously you, the expert, do a better
Yeah,
job of
definitely.
explaining it than me.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yes, thank you for asking about more detail too. So with Focus 2, it's an online self-assessment. I can, give you the link and the password to it. Essentially what it is you answer a bunch of different questions that focus on your skills, your interests, and your values. And then it comes back with results in different categories. So, and you can kind of say what careers would be good for me if I take into account all of these. So if I look at my values and my skills and my interests, or what if I just look at my values? Values could be things like work-life balance, or maybe even monetary compensation, things like that. So it's cool to play around with. And I really like it because it gives you a list of different careers that students with your profile. So you get a profile based on, and I'm blanking on each category, but social, et cetera. It'll tell you what kind of worker individual you seem like from the questions answered, and then it'll give you different careers that that match with that. The other thing that I think is really helpful is there's a place on it where you can say what have students from RPI specifically done with the chemical engineering major, for instance, in this case. And again, I think that's very helpful for students to see as well. So it can show you, it can open you up to new careers. And then I often refer students to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that occupational outlook handbook that I referenced in one of my slides, that gives information about just basic information about careers, salaries, etc. if it mentions a career you haven't heard of. So yeah, I think it can definitely be helpful. I've used a similar thing at my prior school, and students here and there have always found it very interesting too. And I did it myself, and it did label me social and a couple other things, which is not surprising given my job. But it's just interesting to see whether it matches with what you think. So that's my spiel on it. But yeah, I always recommend if students are interested, if they take it, and then we can go over results together.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. And definitely to reiterate everything Lindsay has said, she's definitely someone that I love to recommend to anyone who is currently undeclared and trying to figure things out, or not even just undeclared, but if you have declared a major and you're just trying to figure out exactly what road to walk down. Lindsay has been doing this undeclared stuff with me for a while, so she is a great resource for you, and also obviously a very wonderful, lovely, kind person, which is nice.
So
Nice
are
to
you.
have on the other side.
Thank you.
Of
Yeah,
course.
definitely.
So it
Definitely.
doesn't look like we have any CCPD specific questions.
Okay.
So I'd love to thank you again, Lindsay, for your time.
Thanks.
Um, and we will, we'll share your email tomorrow in our follow-up. So if anyone wants to connect with you about Focus 2, which I think is a really cool resource. For the record, when I took it, I was a career counselor, and it told me I should be a career counselor. So,
Oh, that's so
so obviously I was in the right job, and then I decided to become an academic advisor. So, but it's very, very similar.
That's
Um,
funny.
Yes. So, thank you, Lindsay, and we'll
Thank
chat with you
you.
soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.
Awesome. So, the next part of tonight, we are all hopefully familiar with, or for the new people, should be very excited about, which is, of course, our formal panel. So, I will bring Kara on board right now, my colleague and friend from the Hub, who will introduce our panelists and then begin the formal question and answer section. And as always, as you are hearing what everyone has to say, if you have any questions, throw them right into the chat room. I am going to literally be copying and pasting them into a Word doc so we can get to them at the end. And that way we make sure that everyone's questions are answered. All right, Kara, floor is yours.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Kara Leith, and I am one of the 5 advisors in the School of Engineering Advising Hub. The majors that I advise are electrical engineering, computer and systems engineering, and materials engineering. So I'm actually not currently the chemical engineering advisor. So as you go along, if you're starting to consider chemical engineering, and after talking to Kristen, she encourages you to speak with that advisor, the name of the person that you're looking for will be Valerie Swenson. Now, I did advise chemical engineers about 2 years ago. So basically the one piece of advising advice I'll give you before jumping to the panel is this major more than others really would like you to know that you want it starting in sophomore year. The first chemical engineering course, Chemi 2010, is offered every fall, and it starts a very long chain of prerequisites. So while some other majors like electrical and computer systems, at least for the ones I advise, you can kind of fudge your way through for almost up to 2 years without knowing, Chemi, you would want to hit the ground running fall of sophomore year. So enough from me. Let's turn it over to the people you want to see. So if all of our wonderful panelists would like to flip on their cameras, we'll take about 2 minutes per person for everybody to just introduce themselves, give a brief introduction, and we'll jump into questions. And then just as a quick reminder for order, let's start with George, and then we'll move on to Julie, then Matthew, and then Mary. So whenever you're ready, George, take it away.
All right, thank you. So, hey, good evening, everybody. I think this is an awesome course. I went to RPI. I graduated a long time ago, back in '94, but I never had such a course, and I would have loved it to have, just to see all these majors and all the, different things that different engineers did. I never had that. But so I graduated back in '94, and actually I had started thinking about architecture. But when I actually got to RPI, I thought, hey, I want to really do engineering. I loved taking apart things. I loved chemistry. So chemical engineering made a lot of sense to me. And I did start that. And I also had an unusual experience in that I think sometime in my junior year, I decided to transfer into biomedical engineering. I tried that for a semester, and I did not think that was the best fit. I'm glad I did it though to try and see what it was like. But I got back into chemical engineering, and as to the Kara was saying about chemical engineering, it's very structured. So if you kind of join late or get out of it and get into it, I lost basically a year. So I was part-time my last year, my super senior year, you could say. But actually, one of the good things about doing that was that I was part-time, but also working in the research labs for about 20 hours of the week, my last year while I was doing, I was part-time in chemical engineering. And what that did was it gave me just a love for doing research. So I actually stayed and got I got a master's degree, and then later on got a PhD at RPI in chemical engineering. And right now I work at General Electric in the Global Research Center, and I work on doing research on wind turbines. So, again, all that work in graduate school kind of helped me forge that pathway into doing research. And I realized that that's, kind of the thing I loved. I love doing technical stuff, and I wanted to stay that route. But, maybe specifically for you guys, a bachelor's is something that I think is a very low stress kind of, decision. I think that if you get a bachelor's in any kind of engineering, you could really go into almost anything. You can go to medical school, you can go to law school, you could go to management, you could go to, more technical stuff like I did. But it really allows you to go into so much more. And in industry at GE, I've noticed that, people with a bachelor's in engineering, and it really didn't matter what kind of engineering, but you really could get into almost anything non-engineering, like marketing or sales, or legal or things like that. But as opposed, if you start off with like a marketing degree, I don't really see many examples of people in marketing like saying, doing like, hardcore engineering. So, hopefully my message to you is like, relax, don't worry about it too much. I think, by getting in engineering, it's a great foundation, a great basis to jump off into other things. So, just a little aside, I have a lot more ties to RPI. Actually, I have 3 kids, and 2 graduated from RPI. Actually, my daughter, Sarah, will be joining next week. She's a materials engineer. She also subsequently works for GE, but she'll talk about materials. My son, he works for basically managing the electrical grid. He's an electrical engineer. And I have a daughter who is actually an undeclared engineering major at RPI now. She's a sophomore. And she went through the whole thing. She's still deciding, so I don't think it'll be in chemical engineering, but yeah, a lot of ties. And also, I for the past 14 years, I've been teaching the senior design class at RPI in chemical engineering. So I get to come back and see the seniors go and do designs in chemical engineering, get involved that way. So probably done 2 minutes at least, but looking forward to talking more to you guys later.
Thank you. Now, Julie.
Hey everyone, my name is Julie Robinson. I actually on Clemson University down in South Carolina. I'm from the Carolinas. And I came up to RPI. Oh, no way, go Tigers. So I came up to RPI for my PhD, and also in chemical engineering. And kind of the reason I came to RPI was to work for a specific professor in the Chemie program. So I worked for Steve Kramer, and maybe I can tell you a little bit more about my story as the evening goes on. But basically, I did undergrad research at Clemson, and I came to RPI to continue doing continue doing research in the same field. So I currently work at Merck, and I work in the downstream engineering group. So what this means is I help develop purification processes, and I work primarily on oncology drugs, so antibody drugs meant to treat cancer. Yeah, so that's me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And then Matt, you're up. You're still muted on my end.
Thanks. You got me now? All right. So sorry about that. I'm Matt Aguiar, and I think I'm truly the dinosaur of the group. And I graduated back in 1979 and worked 39 years for EXXONMOBIL. I started Exxon and then EXXONMOBIL, and retired last year. So I'm newly retired and enjoying it, living right now in Asheville, North Carolina, actually splitting my time between Texas and Asheville, North Carolina, which is just a fantastic location. I'm sure you can attest to that, Julie. But I actually got into chemical engineering. I started actually in biomedical engineering. And it was actually the early infancy of the group of the whole curriculum there, and I was interested in it. but then decided after, my first semester that I would switch to chemical engineering because I liked the more structured program. I liked the industry opportunities, and I also thought that I wanted to get into management. And I thought there were more opportunities through chemical engineering to do that than biomedical. And of course, the biomedical engineering field has just grown tremendously in the last 40 years. So it's a completely different field now than from when I started, which then it was mostly research. But I went on to graduate in '79, went on to Purdue and got an MBA, and started actually in the finance controllers organization for Exxon. Decided that I wanted to do some technical work, and so spent some time in manufacturing and managing operations. And then I just really had a very varied business career, and in both manufacturing as well as general management. I had opportunities in sales, planning, business development. I ran several global businesses for Exxon, worked in both chemicals and refining, worked across the U.S. and then spent 10 years in Asia on 2 assignments there, and which was a great experience. We can talk about that later. I think there was a question about that, but it was a great career for me and tremendous opportunities and great assignments that I had overseas. Did extensive traveling, particularly through Asia and as well as Europe and Latin America. So I've got 3 kids. One's an engineer who went to Cornell. He's a mechanical engineer, and my other son's an economist, and a daughter that's a marketing manager. And but enjoying retirement right now, and look forward to further discussion.
Great, thanks so much. And last but not least, Mary, come on up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Margaret, and I'm a second-year PhD student in the chemical engineering department, but I also did my undergrad here also as a chemie. So this will be my 6th year, I guess, at RPI. I'm from the Philippines, but grew up in the Boston area. And I decided to do chemical engineering because I really like chemistry and math from high school. I didn't want to do too many like memorizations of things, more of like calculations, and that's why I went the chemical engineering route instead of just chemistry. Throughout my time at RPI and the chemie curriculum, I got to do some things towards material science. So now I'm doing research for my PhD under Dr. Yu and Dr. Underhill on creating these new types of materials to do carbon capture, and just loving how I can stay a chemie and use my chemie knowledge, but also touch upon different aspects of and different types of sciences. That's me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So at this point, we'll be moving into the questions portion. So before I ask the first question, I just want to remind all the students that as we're going along, if you have any questions come up, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we can make sure that we address all of those towards the end. So I feel like the first question we had here, a lot of people actually touched on, which was, what made you decide to be a chemical engineer? So obviously, if anybody would like to add to their answer, I think that would be very welcome. And then maybe just to try to bring a bit of a different spin, maybe beyond what made you decide to be a chemical engineer, maybe as students are thinking about it, what are maybe some traits or maybe some skills or interests that you think would be very fitting for chemical engineering? And why don't we start with Matt?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I really started in biomedical engineering and switched to chemical engineering. But I've always enjoyed chemistry, and I was pretty good at it. But I guess what I liked about chemical engineering was I thought that it offered opportunities in industry that I thought were very interesting. And as I've learned, working for EXXONMOBIL, a lot of our senior management, particularly in the in the chemical side of the business as well as in refining have a background in chemical engineering. So it's a great degree, particularly if you're interested in management or you're interested in the business side of things. Economics is extremely important in chemical engineering as you're working through designs and things like that. So it's very practical, is what I would say. And I noticed that as I took electrical courses and I took mechanical courses, practical also. But I found that the chemical side, chemical engineering, was very practical, very tied to industry, and something that that I could get excited about.
Great. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Again, I know some people said more or less versus why they started. So maybe just like pop a hand if you want to say something. Okay, Julie, thank you.
Yeah, so I agree with the other panelists that one of the benefits of chemical engineering is that it's so versatile. For example, now I work in like biotech, but when I first chose chemical engineering, I thought maybe I wanted to go into green energy, and my interest switched. But one thing I would add is that like chemical engineering, what attracted me to that major, I was initially deciding between material science and chemical engineering as a freshman. And I really liked the like the logical thought process and the way chemical engineering, the curriculum is just structured to teach you how to think. And as you know, Matt kind of alluded to, you can apply that thinking process to many different areas, whether it be like the economic or the business side or the technical science side. So that's one of the things I think that is a benefit, but it also attracted me to the major in the first place.
Great. And then George or Mary Margaret, do either of you have anything to add? If not, we can move on to the next question. All right, great. So we'll throw in a couple that are a little more specific to people. So let's start actually with Julie. So you mentioned you studied at Clemson for your undergraduate degree and RPI for your graduate degree. And as a fellow Tiger alum, obviously you could say that RPI and Clemson are very, very different, both on a regional level and in an institutional level. So could you maybe tell us a bit about what it was like to switch to a different type of school when looking at graduate school? Because that's something that some students like to consider at times.
Definitely, yeah. So I like Clemson is a big state school in South Carolina. There's a large undergraduate population that, as well as a graduate population. So I'd say it's pretty similar to RPI in terms of that regard. So maybe I can tell you a little bit about like how I got into like my interests. So I knew I wanted to go to grad school coming into Clemson. So I started looking at undergraduate research positions the summer after my freshman year. As I mentioned, I like talked to one professor who did green energy research, and then I talked to the professor who ended up being my undergrad research advisor, who worked on this technology called chromatography, which is a method of separating proteins. And I ended up working for him. And initially, I thought it was just going to be a summer project. I ended up working for him for the rest of my time at Clemson for 3 years. So when it came time to, have the talk about graduate school, I was like, I really love what I'm doing. I could study this for another 5 years. And so he was like, Julie, you're welcome to work in my lab and continue your project for your PhD, but you've worked with me for a while. So both him and some of my advisors in the Honors College at Clemson just recommended that it might be good to go get a different perspective. And so it's a very small field. People know each other. And so my Clemson advisor recommended a couple different schools where people also work on chromatography. And one of them was RPI. And I applied to RPI because Steve Kramer was a professor here. I came on the visit weekend and just like really connected with Kramer. And so that's how I came to RPI. Now, in terms of like, I think there are like very different schools in terms of the number of students, maybe like, Division I, big football school versus big hockey school, like South versus North. But I'd say, like there's a lot of similarities also in terms of like an emphasis on, just like both undergraduate education as well as excellence in research. So that's kind of how I ended up at RPI from Clemson.
Great, thank you. And then let's go with a question for George. So you mentioned that you get to be involved with the capstone for chemical engineering, and chemical engineering has a pretty unique capstone compared to a lot of majors in the School of Engineering here, which tend to do something multidisciplinary. So could you tell us a bit about your experience with capstone mentoring and what that looks like for chemies?
Sure. So let me define what capstone means. So capstone is just another word for senior design project. So basically, a student will go and take all the classes they have to take. And then at the very end, you want to ask them, hey, what did you learn? And, how well can you take what you learned and put it into something that kind of resembles what you would do out in the field. And so that's what we try to do in capstone class or senior design class. It's an awesome course. It was my favorite course when I was an undergraduate. And the reason why it's a great course is because you work in groups, just like you would in industry, and you work on a big project. So you work on one project all semester. Now, chemical engineering, so I'll do I'll go off a little bit on why chemical engineering design project is different than another senior design project. So chemical engineering actually has their own capstone class. So it's just on chemical engineering. And what we do is we have all the students try to design an actual chemical plant. So this kind of emphasizes the systems sort of approach of chemical engineering, which is one big difference, I think, also chemical engineering versus other engineering. Some engineers look at like little gadgets or little devices, and a chemical engineer looks at like a whole kind of system of things. So that kind of makes chemical engineering very unique in itself. But we also use that to actually teach a class and have that class kind of design a whole chemical plant on their own. I do know that other engineering majors, they kind of combine, like I'm pretty sure this is correct, but the mechanical, electrical, and material, they kind of combine and they work on one project on their own. But chemical engineers really get that unique, dedicated look at a chemical engineering problem, which was what they'll see out in the field. So I love teaching it. I think it's unique. I think chemical engineers get a really individual experience out of their senior year projects. So I don't know, Kara, did I answer the question you were asking, or?
Yeah, I would say so. You touched on why it was a unique capstone and all that good stuff.
Okay.
Great. All right. Next, let's go to Mary Margaret. So you mentioned that you are in progress with your PhD. So what are some of your goals? What are your career plans for when the PhD is done?
So I really like learning about the fundamentals of why certain things happen and why like certain phenomena happen. So that's kind of why I decided to go get my PhD, touch upon more of the research side before going back into like big industry and processes type of work. So I'm thinking that after my PhD, to continue on a technical type of work. So going into a national lab maybe where that lab has certain like techniques that they like to use on certain projects or projects that touch upon a lot of fields, but getting to know that technique and how it works, now you can utilize it, make it even better for getting, figuring out new things, or going to like a nonprofit organization. But I want to say in the green energy side, trying to figure out how to help like prevent the pollution that's occurred, how to regenerate the earth, and also working with other like companies to show how we can like work together with like organizations and companies and industry to go greener. So it can have a bit of working with other people as well as staying on the sciencey technical side.
Great, thank you. So next question is for Matt. So something unique that you mentioned was that during your time at EXXONMOBIL, you got to live abroad for an extended period of time. So do you have any specific advice for students who are interested in potentially working or living abroad, even if it's just for something more short term, like an internship or something?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in joining a company that had global operations because I always had a fascination for different countries, and also thought that living overseas and living abroad would be a great experience, and it was. So Exxon sent me overseas. I hadn't really thought about Asia, but it was a fabulous experience for me. And when you live in different countries and you get to experience the culture, you get to live with the people, you learn their customs, you learn their culture, and you learn the diversity. It was just a great experience for me, and it was even a bigger experience for my family. I mean, they had been somewhat sheltered when I took them overseas, and now they're much more sort of rounded and much more sort of understanding of sort of the global nature of things and diversity, different cultures, and all that. So I would heartily encourage it if you get an opportunity. Was very important to me to join a company that had global operations and would send me overseas. That was one of the criteria that I was looking for, and fortunately I got that experience. And when you live overseas, you work overseas, it's different than just visiting there, and you get a chance to to really experience it. And when I came back to the U.S. and I had global operations, just understanding that diversity and understanding, for instance, the difference in cultures. I mean, I can give you a quick example that in global meetings that I had, I would notice that the Americans would quickly try to dominate the conversation, and it would be a task of mine to be able to bring out particularly some of the Asian participants to be able to speak more, because they had great thoughts, great ideas or whatever, but they were frequently reticent to speak up, and particularly when there was higher levels of people involved in the meeting. So that was something that I learned overseas, and I also learned, just the difference in the countries, and it would drive me nuts when I would talk to some of my colleagues and they would think of Asian as one culture, when I'd say there's a myriad of different cultures, and somebody from Singapore is very different than China or Japan or Thailand or the Philippines, and so that was all a great learning experience for me.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll do another round of individualized ones, and then we'll close with some questions for the whole panel. So back to Julie. So you mentioned you've been involved in research for a really long time, and as a result, you have a lot of publications. So could you maybe tell us about one of your more favorite projects or areas that you've researched and published in?
Sure, yeah. So one of my favorite projects didn't start out as a formal assignment. It was the result as a, what if I do this? Let's see what happens. So it was just like a question I had one day that I went into lab and did an experiment, and then it turned into, I published a couple of papers on it, actually. So I mentioned that I work on purifying antibodies, and that's what I do currently. And that's what I studied during my PhD. I studied the mechanism of interaction between these proteins called antibodies and filters that you use to purify out your specific drug target from a lot of very similarly related impurities. And so an antibody, just picture like a Y-shaped molecule. So it's a really large protein and it has a lot of different subunits. And so as I mentioned, I wanted to understand like how do these proteins, these antibodies interact with these filters, and then how can we apply that knowledge to better purify them? And so one day I was like, well, is the sum of the parts of the antibody equal the whole? So if I chop this antibody up into the different subunits, will that be like if I add subunit A to subunit B, will that equal subunit A plus B and its behavior on these filters? Well, it turns out the answer was no, and that kind of led us down this rabbit hole. But sometimes rabbit holes are bad, but in a PhD, you're spending 4 or 5 years studying a very specialized topic. So in this case, the rabbit hole turned out to be really interesting and pretty cool. And so I was able to publish a couple of different papers on that. And it was one of my favorite projects just because of its origins. It was just like a curiosity question. I was interested one day. It was, kind of in my quote unquote free time in lab. I just did a side experiment to see what happened because I wanted to see what happens. I remember I was analyzing the results. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is actually super cool. I got really excited. I showed my advisor. He also got really excited. So just kind of like a fun little story of how like being curious and asking a question turned into something interesting and applicable.
Great. That's a really cool story. So thank you for sharing. Let's go to George. So you had indicated that you had changed your major from biomed to chemical, and then in industry, you had experience with materials and project management, which a lot of people might kind of relate to industrial and systems engineering. So you have a very cool multidisciplinary view of things. So I think you already touched on this a little bit, but can you maybe go into a bit more detail just about the applicability of an engineering education and how basically this idea that your major is not your destiny and that it's good to pick something you're interested in, but how that can apply more broadly as you go out into the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So an engineering degree, I mean, if you think about what an engineer does, they kind of actually are, you think about it, like they solve problems and they allow you to think critically about things. And it's not like other people can't do that, but engineers are really, set up to solve different problems. And so if you have that basic skill to solve things, then you really can't say that, well, I only can solve chemical engineering problems. And my career has kind of been like that. I've always been technical, but I've worked in things like, like I've worked in computer chips, which is, more like physics and materials. I've worked in solar cells, which is definitely more materials and electrical engineering. And I've done actually, I've worked in something called the licensing department, which is basically taking discoveries and trying to sell them to other people so they could use them. And that was much more like more management, things. But again, all these kind of jobs really required you to think critically and solve problems. And so I loved doing that before even going to RPI. I knew that was kind of the thing for me. And that's really, you have an inquisitive mind and you really love solving things. It really doesn't mean that you're stuck in one little box. And as I mentioned before, if you get a bachelor's, that really allows you to almost go anywhere. It doesn't mean you can't go anywhere in terms of like going to other things. It's really the opposite. It allows you to, kind of, it kind of tells employers that, hey, this person can kind of, think critically, they can solve problems. And so it's really up to you to figure out, where you want to go from there. So, again, I mentioned it before, you shouldn't stress out too much about really, hey, which really engineering. I think it's, all these, an engineering degree in general is really, a platform to go off in a lot of different places. And, I've done that, most of my career. It's always been on the technical, but, it's been in some management and in those areas as well. But, chemical engineering really allows you, I think, to do that specifically because it's more on a systems sort of level, as I mentioned before. You kind of see things as like a system, and so it makes it almost easier to go into a lot of other things.
Great, thank you. And I feel like that's such a good and salient point, especially for this audience of undeclared students, to just remember that picking a major is important, but it certainly will not be the end all be all for anything. So let's go back to Mary Margaret. So I feel like you touched a little bit on this in your last answer, but while you were an undergraduate here, you had quite a few internships. And then I know you touched a bit on the idea of you really wanted to get to the root cause of things, and that was part of the inspiration for your PhD. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about your internship experiences, and maybe if there was anything else you wanted to kind of expand on in the idea of how you made that decision of, is it time to start in industry or do I go straight to the PhD?
Yeah, I started doing undergrad research kind of later in my career after junior year, and I applied to internships, trying to get my foot in the door in places, but I also decided to apply to one of RPI's kind of like fellowships, which is kind of like a research scholarship in a sense. And I was able to get that and work on a research project for 10 weeks during the summer, just focusing on this one project. And so after getting that experience, I applied to more things, and this one company called Ames Goldsmith up in Glens Falls, like north of Saratoga, I applied to them and they were interested in hiring me to create this process for them, which was nice since I took capstone just the year before they hired me. So they were like, oh, you have this experience of looking at a plant and creating a process to do for them, recovering something in their process streams. But you also have this research experience where you also look at things like the atomic molecular scale. So during my internship, I was working on said process, but my supervisor was also like, hey, I have this really cool idea about making our product, which is silver, from particles to rods. And given your research experience, do you want to kind of work on that on the side in the lab? And so I got to work on making my own chemical processes and this big, large scale thing. Whereas on the side, when I got bored or something didn't work, I can just go into the lab and kind of look at this other problem of how to make stuff in the opposite micro scale. And the more fun days were when I was in the lab getting dirty with my hands, trying these things, seeing what pops up, just learning at what one change could make to a new material. And so I figured that was similar to what I did during my summer during research. And somebody was like, that's what you do for 4 or 5 years at a PhD. So I was like, sounds like that's the next step for me.
Great, thank you so much. And then we'll do our last individual question for Matt. So again, it's something that you briefly mentioned before, but I think a little more detail is always great. So a lot of our students ask, but even in their first year with the hub, about the idea of pursuing a master's right out of college. So we just got the PhD perspective, and a lot are looking at the master's. So you both have a master's and switched fields for your master's degree. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how you decided between staying in your field and picking a new one for your master's, and what, if any, doors you think that degree specifically opened that may not have been the same had you just gone straight from bachelor's to industry?
Yes. So I knew in my last 2 years at RPI that I was really interested in working towards the business side of things. So I was intrigued with the economics around chemical engineering, and so I wanted to get a business degree because I thought it could help me, in the future. And I debated about going to work first and then getting an MBA or going straight to get an MBA. And I decided that the time in 1979, the job market was pretty hot, and I decided that I didn't want to lose too much time. So I decided I'd go right away and get my MBA and get the grounding in on the business side of things around economics and accounting and finance and all that, and before I started working. So I decided to go to Purdue. It was a cheaper program than some of the other business programs, and a lot of the people that I worked with that I ended up, as my colleagues and all, did get an MBA also. Some took leave of absence and got an MBA, or some got it at night. I wouldn't say it's a prerequisite or it's a requirement, but I found it to be pretty helpful as as I was getting into some more senior positions in management, to be able to draw back on some of the stuff that I had learned in MBA, particularly on the finance aspects. So when I was running businesses and all, and spent quite a bit of time working through balance sheets and, accounting and finance and all that. It was helpful to have that. When I was overseas, I would work a lot with our treasurer's organization in debt financing and things like that. So having that background was very helpful, as I knew I wanted to get into business, into management. I also have some colleagues that I worked with that learned that on the job, or were sent to school to be able to learn that. So I wouldn't say it's an absolute requirement, but I found it to be very helpful.
Great, thank you. So now we have about 10 minutes left in this portion. So we're gonna shift, still asking questions, but shift gears a little bit, that these will just be general questions for the whole panel. So for the first one, probably one of my favorites to ask is, what is something, or more than one thing if you'd like, that you wish you knew as a first-year college student that you do now? So if anyone wants to say something, just go ahead and unmute. There's not too many of us, so it shouldn't be too chaotic.
Well, maybe I'll start. I guess one thing that I didn't realize when I became a chemical engineer was how concentrated a lot of the operations in the industry was in certain parts of the country. So it wasn't a problem. I ended up down in the Gulf Coast. But if you're interested in chemical engineering and you're interested in working in industry, most of the operations, or a lot of the operations, are really concentrated on the Gulf Coast. So living in that part of the country is something you have to be sort of comfortable with. And that was something that I wish I had known in my first year.
Great. Anyone else have something they'd like to add?
I would say that work-life balance is really important. I know for like a lot of RPI students, you're probably similar to how I was as a freshman. You have like, maybe even if you're undecided in your major, you have some goals that you would like to work towards, but just remember that it's really the balance between, like developing yourself academically, but allowing yourself to develop outside of like schoolwork and book learning, whether it be like leadership opportunities through like sports or clubs or whatever extracurricular activities you pursue.
Great. George or Mary Margaret, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I wish I had maybe realized that, going to a professor is you should actually do that and feel comfortable to do that. I know that when I was a freshman, I never would have done that to go see a professor, but in reality, they want to help you out. They want to, they want to help you out with your classes, and especially if you have any questions. And I never would have gone to see somebody, but I wish I'd known that, it would have been, it's something that you got to step out of your comfort zone. But, and some professors may not be great, but, I would say most of them are, and go see them if you have issues. And I totally agree with Julie, organizing your time is probably the most valuable thing. And I was terrible at it. But if, you guys just kind of think about what you're going to do the coming week and kind of organize it, it really, it takes practice, but it really helps you out. And again, going to see somebody for help, most people want to help you out.
Great. Mary Margaret, is there anything you'd like to add?
I guess just a quick one is that if you decide to pick chemical engineering, even just engineering, that math will always be in your subjects. So take the time to at least learn the basics of like DiffEq, differential equations pops up a lot, because that's how natural processes or anything that occurs can be modeled by those types of equations. So math will always be there and will actually be really helpful for you to understand something, especially going towards the junior or senior classes. That would be a good subject to make sure you learn.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then another one for the panel is, we've talked a lot, obviously, about academics. So thinking a little bit outside the classroom, which again, some of you have touched on here and there, would you have any specific advice for students in terms of getting involved outside of class while they're on campus?
I would, really recommend, as I think as Julie stated, that when I started at RPI, I was very stressed out about the academics and grades and of course RPI back then was very competitive. I'm sure it still is, but I think the school has improved over time. But I think I got involved more with with things outside of the school, joined a fraternity, got involved with some clubs, and that's really the stuff that I remember now. It's going to college, that 4-year experience is a very unique time in your life, and you'll have plenty of time for the grind of work and all of that. So it's a special time, and I wish that I had gotten involved and sort of de-stressed a little bit earlier in my whole college experience, and not worried so much about the grades and the academics and all, and tried to take in the whole experience.
Absolutely. Anyone else have some advice they'd like to share?
So I'll just say, oh, go ahead, Mary Margaret.
You can start, Julie.
Okay. So I was just going to say, it's important to get involved on campus. And for me, it was, finding what I'm passionate about outside of chemical engineering to bring balance to the force. But I'd also say, it's important to explore your surroundings. So just looking back on my academic career, I was much better about this in grad school than I was in undergrad. And, it's, whether I'm guessing a lot of you probably aren't native specifically to Troy, New York, and there's a lot of cool things to explore. So make sure you take that opportunity as well while you're here.
To jump off of what Matt said, make sure you have make the time to not just make friends in your major who will be helpful, because a lot of engineering work is group work, but also outside of your major to give you a broader sense of what other people are doing, and not just that, to give you like a break from having to think about all these class concepts, so you're not always thinking about work or science and engineering. And also, oh, I lost my train of thought.
No worries. George, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, these have been great responses. I don't think I have anything to add to those.
Okay, sounds good. And let's see. Usually we cut at 6:50 for student questions. So since we've got 1 minute, now I haven't seen any come up in the chat. So for the students watching, if you have any questions, go ahead and start typing, or if you feel brave, feel free to unmute and ask as well. I'll give a quick pause here just to give a little bit of typing time. And then worst case, got a couple backup questions, we could always go to that. So give a quick typing break. Okay, don't see anything so far. If you are typing, please keep typing and enter. We will circle back. But just so since we have a little bit of time left, kind of building off something that Julie mentioned, and something as a Troy resident I'm passionate about, is I think kind of getting to see the area really is important if it's going to be your home for a few years. So could everyone maybe go around and share one of your favorite parts of Troy, or something that you think students should go see or explore before they graduate? I know for me living here, I'll just start with a quick one. This is relatively new. One of my favorite places in Troy is Bard and Baker. It's a board game cafe that is literally a 30-second walk from Blitman. They have over 700 games, and they make some really awesome drinks and snacks. And the owners are some of the kindest people. So they have a student discount if you're an RPI staff, faculty, or student. So highly recommend checking them out. They're an easy trip, and again, good games, good food, good times. Any other Troy favorites from the panel?
I would highly recommend the farmers market. It's on Saturday mornings, and it continues year round. So in the summers it's outdoors, in the winter they move it inside to like the atrium. But it's really awesome time to get out and just kind of like mingle with community members. I loved watching like families. I would dog watch. Just a great time, and it's right in downtown Troy.
Yeah, downtown.
Dog watching in the farmers market, and I just had to there.
I was about to say, they have awesome ice cream down at Dutch Udder in downtown Troy. And just a personal, my youngest daughter, who's a sophomore, she works down there on the weekends. So you might see her.
Awesome. Any favorites from Matt or Mary Margaret?
I was just going to say, there's a lot of different types of food downtown, whether it be Asian or Mediterranean or your classic Italians, American bistro, just everything down there. Get to try them all before you leave.
You know, it was so long ago that I can't remember too much of Troy, and I would have to say that Troy has improved a lot in the last 40 years from when I went to school. You know, we honestly didn't spend that much time in downtown Troy, but having visited back to the campus and all, and seeing what Troy is now, it's a much different city than it was 40 years ago. But I really like the whole area. You know, that whole upstate New York. We used to go up to Saratoga. I had one summer semester, and we used to go up to Saratoga for concerts up there all the time. That I still remember quite a bit. I don't know whether they still do those or not, but I think it's just a beautiful area of the country that I just enjoyed exploring. You know, that and some of the history there.
What's one part of your job that really cemented knowing that chemical engineering was just everything that you wanted out of your career and your professional life?
Well, I enjoyed the technical aspects of the job, and I think, as has been, as I think it was George that mentioned earlier, is we hire a lot of engineers for problem solving, and I always found that to be very interesting. But I have to say, after almost 40-year career, that the part of the job that I enjoyed the most was really, which came later in my career, which is really meeting people and really, sponsoring them and mentoring them and really helping them with their careers. I mean, that's the part of the job that I got the most satisfaction with. And for me, having spent so much time in Asia, it was really helping the Asians in the company and in being able to advance in their career and seek the opportunities as we were trying to grow that part of our business. But it was really the people aspects of the job that I found the most interesting. But obviously, you have to have a good foundation in order to be able to get in the door and be able to work. So the engineering, I thought, was a good fit of that.
Yeah. And you know what? I love hearing all of you say that kind of thing, because, that's one thing, and I'm sure some of my students in the room have heard me talk about this before, but, you're not stuck once you pick a major. It seems like a huge choice when you come in, but like once you pick a major, you're an engineer. And there is a lot. And so hearing you guys kind of talk about what you've actually done with that degree, and the diversity behind it, and how often do you hear engineers say that they're so excited for the social part? Not very often when they're in college, but so many times when we hear from alumni, they're like, oh my goodness, like the social part, like getting to engage with everyone. So I think it just gives us all something to look forward to. So on that note, I think we'll wrap it up for the night. We have officially lost Kara, our fearless panelist leader. So I just want to, thank our panelists again. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us tonight, on a Monday evening. We are so grateful for that time that you've given us. And, tomorrow, of course, students, I will be emailing a follow-up email. So if the alumni have consented to me sharing contact information, I will put it right in that email. And of course, you know where I am if you have any questions, or if you are one of Valerie's advisees, don't be, shy in asking her questions. Next week is materials engineering, which I think George can help me confirm if I finally got it straight. And other than that, I hope everyone has a really nice night and has a chance to relax.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
luck,
night.
everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.